very much. At this point, we'll turn it over to...
Why don't I kick this off
Okay.
in a moment of crisis because the mouse disappeared.
My bad.
This is the whole crux of it. All right, well, good evening, everyone. Just so you know, the people around the table are your elected and appointed officials. So they are the decision makers when it comes to the planning and zoning process. So the staff standpoint, our job is to do a variety of things related to planning and zoning. The topic for tonight is one specific portion of your new master plan. Okay? We've been working on that thing for years. It's almost finished, but we have these things that we call significant undeveloped lots in the city. And what that means is they're the big vacant properties that remain from north to south in the city. Walker is a pretty diverse place when it comes to land use. So we're trying to custom fit expectations for those properties. That's what master planning is all about. So again, there's no project-related decisions being made tonight or votes on projects. This is way in front of projects. So you put what's called a future land use designation on a piece of property, and you put a density on the property, and then someone makes application, and the planning commission and the city commission reviews those plans against things like what was it proposed for use and density, and there's a whole bunch of other details that are engineering and stuff like that. But really, from a master plan perspective, the big issue is density. So, we want to get some feedback from our elected and appointed officials tonight. This presentation goes site by site. We're going to start with English Hills, the English Hills area. And what I'm going to do is give a couple of introductory slides, and then we're going to ask Kim Sorrell and her group to show very briefly some concepts that they have for their site. Okay? And then we're going to say, okay, we're not doing plan review tonight. We're going to back out and go through some decision-making tools with the city commission and planning commission. Okay? And then we're going to progress on to Fence site in South Walker and everything like that. But I know that the majority of folks are here. And just so Mr. Shoemaker knows, the road's off the plan. Everything else is the same as it was in 2008.
Thank you.
So if you don't want to stick around, you don't have to stick around. We did everything that you asked us to do on the plan. But let's take a look at some things. The agenda for tonight is, again, we've got this master plan for 2020, which is a 20-year plan. So it's looking out to the year 2040. And we're going to talk about future land use versus community character. And that's what Chris, our consultant, is going to help us explain and understand. For you folks as officials, you're going to get this big book of stuff, right? It's like 400 pages. Well, what do you do with it? You know, staff reads it all the time. We continue to redline and de-typo and all that other stuff with this thing. You folks are eventually going to have that land on your desk. And how are you going to use that as officials to help guide policy and law and infrastructure and all that other stuff in the city? That's really what the master plan is for. Okay? It's a tool for the officials. It's also a tool for the community too. They have some expectations about what's going to happen in the community. Okay? Our goal for the meeting is, again, to get some feedback from the City Commission and Planning Commission, site by site, when we look at these things. What type of land use you want to see there in the future? What density, total units, and then site design and clustering, which is something that we really haven't done in Walker yet. But on properties that have natural features, clustering may not be a bad idea, because we hear back from a lot of people that say preserve the natural stuff, which staff is all in favor of. So how can we creatively design these sites without this flag? So that's staff trying to say there's ways to do this that we haven't done before, but let's talk about it and see how that goes. So your schedule, and Chris, I'll handle a couple more slides, then I'll kick it over to you. We're right on the green right now. This has just been the official approval process. We've been working on this for much longer. This is the boxes you have to check from the state to get an official plan. So tonight's our joint meeting. And then we're hoping in October to do the final public hearing at the planning commission level and then get adoption of the city. So all those 400 pages are set except for these SULs. This is more technical for the planning commission and the city commission, but it's important to understand the relationships and the expectations that are already in the draft plan. Chris, feel free to hand you the mouse.
Thanks, Frank. Can everyone hear me all right? Good. All right, as Frank said, my name is Chris Corey. I'm project manager for the master plan with McKenna. We're the consultants engaged to help. And I want to explain these two concepts. Oh, that should be even better. Future land use and community character. As you all know, Walker is a big and diverse place, right? It's a large city, as Frank said, it's got a diverse land uses. And so in order to create a master plan that is internally consistent and comprehensible, we kind of have these two levels of analysis geographically. They are consistent with each other and they are highly related. So the two maps, they're not two totally different things, they go together, but they do have some differences. The future land use map describes land use and density really only. So the future land use map says this area is residential at this many units per acre, this area is mixed use, this area is for industrial or business, and these areas are for open space, more or less. When you get into community character, we take those future land use categories and delve into more specifics. So an example of that is less prominent in the residential side, because the residential side will say it's residential with this many acres. Community character may say we want this sort of typology, this type of housing unit, etc. But there's not as much in that as there is in more of the mixed use areas where we have very specific differences. And I've labeled some of our mixed use categories up there: neighborhood node, urban corridor, and the specific character that's envisioned in those areas is laid out in the plan. The reason we did it this way, the future land use allows you to look at a map of the city and understand the city immediately based on that map, right? The entire city, 9 miles from north to south, 6 miles from east to west, etc. Whereas community character allows you to zoom in on your particular neighborhood and get an understanding of what may be coming in next door. So with that, I think you'll see maps of both types tonight, and we'll try to identify exactly what you're looking at in each case. I guess some sort of error message here. Anyway, but we just want to make sure that the distinction between the two is clear and what they're used for. Although, as I said first, they are intended to be consistent with each other. So it's not like something's hiding on one map that's not on the other. With that, we'll keep moving on. I did include this slide. This illustrates the difference between the two in that the future land use categories, there are far fewer of them, right? Because the community character categories slide up under some of those future land use categories. Now we're going to move on to each lot. Do you want me to handle this, Frank, or do you want to take over the mouse again?
Well, why don't you click the next slide? And the red parcels that you see on the map up there are all of these large undeveloped properties from north to south. So you may not be, I assume that most of you don't look at a map of Walker a million times a day like we do. So Walker is kind of wrapped around the northwest edge of Grand Rapids, right? And the river runs around it. So you can see the river on the map. All those red sites from north to south are a little bit different. You know, there's the English Hills area up in the northeastern part of the city, all the way down to the fencing site downtown, or excuse me, the south area, and then we got downtown Sandy in the middle. It's a whole hodgepodge determine density on a site. You know? If you're English Hills, or if you're Lincoln Lawns, or if you're the Fensky site, and you're planned for residential, how do you know how many units should go on that site? We currently don't have specific detail in the zoning ordinance. The plan should start to clarify that question, and then on the backside, we will make changes to the zoning code. Okay? Because right now, if you look at your plan unit development ordinance, I'm talking City Commission and Planning Commission here, I don't know how to tell you on English Hills, here's the right number of units. Okay? So, we're trying to get some technicalities in there. One of our ideas is that if someone wants to come in and do PUD with plan unit development and cluster the sites, preserve natural features, cluster the site, that they could calculate using gross density, which means the whole acreage of the property. If someone doesn't want to do clustering, which is what we typically get in Walker, which is traditional development, then you would have to do what's called practical density, which is the acreage of the site times 80%. You subtract 20% for road right away, easements, those kind of things. And that's just the way it lays out. It tends to be more of an engineered plan, which is pretty traditional. Just to use a couple of examples, because I know it's tough to listen to this stuff. Up on the whiteboard, the old school method, we use the English Hills Golf Course, and I just want to preamble this. There are 2 lots involved with the English Hills Golf Course. They total 144 acres. Okay. So, the way we have it written out now is the future land use on the golf course is 2 to 4 units per acre. It's called residential growth, but it's the lowest density outside of South Walker. So how does that work? If you came in and said, well, I want to do, that site's got a bunch of natural features, we want to preserve those, so we want to do a plan unit development, and we want to do some clustering, then the gross density calculation would be the whole acreage, 144. Typically, you go to the max, which is why we're trying to not have those max numbers high. You do 144 times 4 equals 570 units max on the whole site. Okay? So that equates to about 4 units per acre. The practical density, if someone didn't want to do a cluster plan unit development, would be 80% of 144 times 4 equals 461 units. Now that doesn't only get a picture in your head, unless you've been around for a while. In 2004, the Pulte plan, that some of you remember, got approved for 660 units in a preliminary manner. I think it was a 2-dimensional plan, but they had 660. So what the Planning Commission and City Commission has said to us throughout is, don't give a lot of density away on these projects. There's a couple in the studio area that are different, but on most of our sites, we're trying to say, encourage good design, preserve some natural features, and use gross density. So, I know that's a little bit technical from a zoning standpoint, but we've got to get some of those things answered, or else we don't have a good guide for the plan.
When you talk about a unit, what is a unit?
And that is a very smart question, right? And that's where I'm going to look to our consultant and say, what do we have in the draft? Because traditionally, if you saw yellow on the map, and it said 2 to 4 units per acre, it would be single family or maybe duplex condos. Okay? So I'm going to let Chris explain that, because that's another detail we need to get hashed out here. Because the plan is written to mix uses so that you can mix neighborhood types.
Is a duplex considered 1 or 2 units?
2 units. Each residential space is a unit.
Yeah.
You got 3-plex, it's 3, you got 4-plex, it's 4, 12, 12, single family home is 1. Okay? So that's how you jumble these numbers together. We just need some clarity. Okay, I don't even remember what the next slide is, but we're going to keep it moving here because we're chewing up some time. And here's the key for the Planning Commission and City Commission, right? Those colors on those maps are essential that we get those straightened out, because that will lead to density. Okay?
I think when it comes to the question, what is a unit? Is a duplex 1 or 2? And the answer, which Frank gave, I think, pretty clearly, is every housing unit is a unit. but that goes to the difference between future land use and community character, and is something that is still, that definition is not up for debate. But whether the units on a site are going to be in the plan as, it can be any type of housing unit you want, as long as you don't exceed this number of housing units, or this particular site under community character should be this type of housing unit or these types of housing units, that is something that's up for discussion tonight. So we want to keep that in mind as we discuss these sites and the proposals for them. Do we want to turn it over to the potential developer at this point, or do we want to go through the plan
If the
first?
chair is okay with that, I will get their presentation up, or again, this is not plan review, this is just for them to show their concept. They have not made application to the city yet. What we try to do with people is, if there are landowners who have ideas, we regularly bring them in and say, run your idea past the city. We haven't made any decisions here yet, but let's see what you got. So I'll put your presentation up, and no more than, we're trying to keep it to no more than 10 minutes here again, just to get a view of everything. And I'll click through when you tell me to click.
Hello? Is it on or not?
It won't go on, you just have to project.
Okay. My name is Mark Davis with Red Hawk Multifamily. I am a developer from Chicago, and we are under agreement to purchase Dave Mitchell's property at this point. I do have copies of this presentation. I'm happy to give to people afterwards if you'd like a copy. Okay, so I'll go through the presentation. So when we looked at the site and the master plan, this is what the current plan that's in the master plan, and it talks about, this is an example, but when I studied this, it really doesn't account for the current wetlands in the property, it doesn't account for any stormwater detention. Besides the property line buffer along the eastern part of the property, the majority of the trees are being wiped out, and overall, overall it's a pretty low density project. And the master plan calls for RG, which is 4 to 8 units to the acre, and this really doesn't represent a density of that, which doesn't really benefit the seller. RG is supposed to be 48 units to the acre, and in the master plan it does talk about large multifamily buildings are applicable or could fit in the majority of this property in the center of it. So it does talk about large multifamily properties being applicable in this zone, basically. The next slide basically shows what the site would look like if you actually did account for all the natural features of the property. And as a developer, we try to retain and maintain all the natural features of the property. So the yellow areas is all the natural wetlands, which host habitat, natural wildlife, and all the light areas are the existing detention. If you added blue, which is stormwater detention, which we use on the property, basically on this plan, majority of the trees would be wiped out, your density would be approximately 1 unit to the acre, if that. So in terms of this plan, and as a seller or a landowner, it's not really feasible for development. So what we did on the next slide, which again, we don't want to talk about slides or presentations of this, is our proposal is to do a clustering of multifamily buildings on the property. When I say multifamily, we're talking about low density multifamily. I have a picture of an elevation. These are only 8 units to the building and 20 units to the building. And when you cluster these units around the property, we're preserving all the existing wetlands in the property. We're preserving all the existing ponds in the property. We're providing much larger property buffers on the property. We're saving the majority of the trees in the property. We're also incorporating the connection, the roundabout that was desired from previous plans, I think from 2002. On this plan, 75% of the property remains open space. It's 100 acres that's being preserved as open space on this property. So we talk about clustering the benefits of it. 75% of this property designed this way is open space. Again, this incorporates small apartment buildings, not large. So when I say large, we're talking about traditional 3-story walk-up buildings in height. These are 2-story buildings that are a height of basically the exact same height as the townhouses and the houses to the east of this property. So these are 2-story buildings. All the buildings are 4-sided. Every unit has a private entrance. So again, these are townhome styles. If you look at them from the road or you see the elevation, these would basically mirror areas, and they're not in contrast with it. This new multifamily housing will benefit the area by bringing in empty nesters and young professionals. The entire eastern portion of that property, which we go back to later, can be donated to the Park District, which again was something that came up in previous master plans. The next slide talks about our proposal in terms of multifamily in general and why multifamily. I do multifamily development across the Midwest. The current properties that are multifamily properties that are in the Bristol area are over 25 years old. They're not modern. They don't have the modern clubhouses, and they're traditional. They're the three-story walk-ups type of apartment complexes. What we're proposing is something that Walker does not have, and Walker has not seen. So we're pretty excited about proposing something that would have. This would be high quality materials, no vinyl siding. We're talking about hardy plank, masonry type of buildings. These would be a modern building with clubhouses, pools, package rooms, etc., which we'll show you a little example of that a little bit later. In general, and this will go on more and more, the renter by choice is increasing. This location is perfect, being the proximity to Grand Rapids. And in general, what we're excited about is people, even from downtown, will be looking to live in Walker because they want to be close to downtown, but they want to be able to live and rent by choice and have a property that has basically 75% open space. The next page is an example of the architecture we're talking about. The top building is an 8-unit structure that is basically a townhouse style. Every single unit has its individual entryway. They all have attached garages. So basically, because in all intents and purposes, they're townhouse buildings. And the building below it is, again, a townhouse-style building that has private entrances. Again, 2-story buildings that the height mirrors the surrounding properties. All basically hardy, cement-based siding, high-quality architecture, pitch roofs. The next page, really quickly, kind of shows you the type of amenities that we do. You got a clubhouse, pool, dog park, fitness centers, medium spaces, and 24-hour package delivery. Again, all the amenities that people are looking for in a multifamily community that we'd be pretty excited to bring to Walker. The next page just talks about impact and how this would benefit Walker. Without going into the details, when you build apartments or homes, you're making jobs. There's a study that shows that for every 100 apartments that are built, if you correlate to that, this would basically generate 220 permanent jobs to the city of Walker and 800 jobs during construction. The other stuff is just stuff that you go quickly in the next page. These are types of developments myself and my partner have done. I've read about the family. Again, we develop around the Midwest. That's really it. So, I don't know if you want to, how you want to handle this next. I do have copies of this stuff. I'm happy to answer questions. Again, the site plan is not finalized. All we want to do is show that by clustering this and presenting this type of a community to Walker, we can, I read every single note in the last 20 years on all these master plans. And I think I accomplished 90% of what the public was looking for on a design for this property. So we had the cul-de-sac, we had the property buffers. Can things be tweaked? Yes, but we're talking about a building that's no closer than 100 feet, almost 200 feet from the nearest home than English Hills and single-family homes. The entire eastern portion is be park district, land, walking paths, etc. That again is a benefit to the surrounding neighborhood. So everything we incorporated was, can we accomplish this? And by this type of community and what we're doing, I know people say, well, it'd be great to have single-family homes on the property. Well, this kind of is that because we're clustering these buildings. We get the density, which is the value to not downsizing the property, but we're creating a property that, for all intents and purposes, I think satisfies what the public and what Walker is looking for this property. So, you can go to the site plan, and I know this is important for some people. We're happy to discuss and answer questions.
I'm Kim Sorrell, for those of you who don't know me, and I own English Hills. And in 1983, we bought this little 9-hole golf course with a little shack on the hill and turned it into 18 holes and then built some condos. And they added rooms along the way. We had fine dining for a while, hopefully you went to that. And there's been 10, 12, 15, I don't even know how many developers that have approached me, that have wanted to buy the property, and then we've gone into discussion with Walker, and it hasn't been the right fit, it hasn't been the right move. I am so proud to be bringing these guys before you, because they believe in everything that you would want. The buffers between them, you know, what the new construction will be, and the houses that are already there, and the condos that are already there are great. They want to preserve all the trees, you know, instead of ripping down trees and going in and just taking stuff away, because it is a beautiful piece of property. If you ever golf there, there's hills, there's ponds, there's, you know, clusters of trees. When the straight wind storm, you guys remember that straight wind storm that came through? We had to do a tree count. We had to have a professional tree count done. We lost 4,090 trees, and you would hardly know it. I mean, there are so many trees on the forest. So I'm really excited about this. I think that the stats prove out what this could be. It is great construction, like Mark said. It is not cheap construction. They're beautiful places. I personally know people my age that would love, love, love to live in a place like this, that are, you know, tired of being a homeowner. I'm tired of being a homeowner. You know, I don't want to mow anymore. I'm tired of being a property owner. I don't want to mow anymore. But anyway, I think that this is so good for Walker. This is something different than what Walker has seen, and it brings everybody else's properties up, because it's such a beautiful, beautiful project. So I'd love you guys to consider, when you look at the master plan, there doesn't need to be commercial on the property. I'm not really for commercial on the property. This really is, I can't imagine a better builder. If you guys look them up, I mean, you should look up this company. I did a lot of research. It's a great company with a great track record. People are loving living in the communities. They create communities. So I think you will love it. I think it'll be a really great thing for the city.
I just want 30 seconds. I grew up as a home builder, just a little personal, like, history. You know, when you create things that are special, you get emotional about it. If we can do this way, of all the projects I've done, this is probably the prettiest development I've ever done in my life. And it'd be something I'd be proud of forever. So if we move forward with Walker and the public, I'm always accessible. My cell phone, you can call me, say, Mark, I'm concerned about this, could you do this? You know, I talk to people all the time. So I'm available. We want to be a public engagement. You can discuss your thoughts, ideas with the city, but if we move this forward, it would be something special. So that's it.
Can I have a copy of?
Yeah, excuse me?
Can I have a copy of your presentation?
Yeah, I brought 20, so I can.
We would like one for.
Do you have the ability to send that electronically?
They have it, so they're welcome to send it out electronically.
If you just want to leave your email address, I'll leave a piece of paper over there. You can write your email address down, and we will.
I'll email my commissioner, how's that?
You email your commission. Very.
I know there's other property owners that want to present anything, so, you know, I'm happy to answer questions outside as well and pass them out. But, you know, we look forward to bringing this forward. We are going to move forward with the application. Kim wrote a nice letter about her intentions, but, you know, it's, for all, you know, he didn't say that, but she's ready to sell and start her retirement as well.
Finances from
Our finances are from?
South Street.
No. This would probably be my local partner from Dome was actually local. His name's Scott Sorensen. You might have heard of him. So my partner is actually local. And our investors actually will probably be local, which is unusual because we've already talked to people and people like, Grand Rapids people like investing in Grand Rapids.
Thank you very much for your presentation. In the interest of time, if we can move to the next site.
So I'm going to go outside. I'm happy to pass things out, answer questions, and go to the site plan.
Mr. Chair, can I make one recommendation? Your first step will be a community meeting. And I would suggest that, within the protocols that are established for COVID and all that stuff, and maybe you invite these
one more back.
Yeah,
This
right
one?
there. Here's the way this thing is built for all of your use districts right now that are residential. Future land use categories, and then your community character, and all the way down to details. They're not single use only. If you look at that text, it says, and I can't read all the way from here, but here's 2 to 4 units per acre residential growth, a low density district, right? 2 units to 4 units, that's our lowest density in the urbanized part of the city. Single family houses, townhouses, duplex, quads, small multifamily, and then all the design features. So it's written, when you see 2 to 4 in yellow, don't think it's just single family. That's why, right now, if you look at, if we did 4 units per acre gross, times 144, that's 576, they would have to cluster. The use type that they can propose would still be consistent with the plan, because you don't family.
And the master plan, you actually have English Hills as RG 4 to 8, which is, has multifamily in it.
We switched that, it's now 2 to 4, but it still matches gross density consistent with what these guys are talking about. We pulled those numbers down because that was the direction we got throughout the city. Don't give it away up front. City Commission, Planning Commission said, pull those numbers down and let's see where we're at. So this is a real world test case that if you went gross density, units would still be 576. And then the question is, well, what types of units? And that's when as a planner, I say, well, what are we getting in these out? And over the past almost 20 years that I've been here, I've heard from the public, preserve that open space, give us those buffers, increase our park space. So those are the drivers to me, maybe more than the use type, provided that we vet out the development. And that's something that we tend to do quite a bit. I think Tim's and her brothers have been upset with us over the years, because we say, nah, it's not really the right price. Now, I'm not saying this is the right one either, because we don't even have an application, but the timing is just coming together. So the next step really is for you folks to talk to those folks, and we're gonna look at what color needs to be on that, because that's the set of expectations. Okay? A lot of words. This is the hard one. The rest of them will flow fairly easily, so we'll make good progress. But why don't we flip through these slides and we'll show you what you've currently got out there, and then we'll make some decisions, and then I'll answer Carol's question again too. When you did it once, we'll do it twice.
So this is the current zoning. As you guys can see, the English Hills Golf Course site, that's kind of been the basis of discussion, although there are 2 other sites that we've designated as significant undeveloped lots, the one immediately to the west and the church across the highway. As you can see, currently the English Hills site has that RPUD designation on it already. But of course, the RPUD would have to be amended to match whatever development gets proposed and then either approved or not. And then the other areas are different, very low density categories that will probably have to be changed for the development. In 2007, there was a plan done, which this is why commercials kind of come up and why it came up in this planning process. Is you could see the commercial that flows through here, the office that runs through here, mixed residential. But most of the detail in this plan has been kind of removed in the current draft to a purely residential focus. Now we've turned the whole thing yellow. Residential growth, 2 to 4 acres per unit. As Frank said, that doesn't necessarily, it could be single family, it could be small multifamily buildings as are being discussed. It shouldn't be large multifamily buildings, and if it is multifamily buildings of any type, the clustering that's being discussed is going to have to happen, or you're going to go over that 4 units per acre. Just a quick note on what else you see on this map. You see the blue and the pink lines. Those are conceptual road connections and bike path connections. And I think that some of the drawings we've seen do make basically those connections, or some of them. And you see the little circle with the green hatching in it. That can still be moved, but that's basically indicating that open space needs to be preserved on this site, and it needs to be preserved not just in the natural features, but also immediately adjacent to the current neighborhoods. That's all what's in the plan right now. So I guess the question, Frank, and to our commissioners is, Are we comfortable with this as of right now in the draft plan? Hearing what you just heard from a developer and from the community.
We need some feedback.
Well, I think it's great that, I like the clustering idea because it does maintain the natural landscape. I love the idea of something that's going to provide park space in the city, things like that. I think, you heard our residents correctly when you heard them say they want to maintain those green spaces and have buffers and things like that. So the concept to me sounds, like the right concept. I don't know if it's the right development, but it's the concept seems to match, what our residents have supported and maintain that we want. And the design, matching again the architecture that's been, the concept of the architecture similarly matches so that it doesn't look like an apartment building necessarily. It looks more like a condo or a family home with detached garages and things like that.
Yeah, I can chime in. I agree. I like the concept here. I like the style of housing. I think that brings something to the table certainly for the development. I like the idea of clustering, and frankly, I would go one further and try to bring more of that development further to the north and protect more of that space that could be, I guess, cluster the open space as well. So more of it can be collected together and really keep it adjacent to all of that existing housing where we have folks living and really maximize that 75% of that space that you're already protecting. See if we can reorganize to better make that better usable for recreation and things like that. But overall, I think this is kind of where I've been thinking would be a good direction for this to go, to get used, to make sure that we're getting the most out of that property. I think again, the style of housing makes a lot of sense to me. The density is important, and making sure that we stay in line with that 2 to 4, I think, is important. But by doing it in this way where you're collecting that housing together, tighter in that space, we really are able to maximize the site. So in concept, I appreciate what that looks like, and I think that for the planning side of things, this is probably the correct direction to take. The master plan and the zoning looks like it does kind of fit what we're looking to do.
This is showing 524 units. I don't know if I brought that up. So, it's 524. It's 144 acres total.
So again,
And then in terms of, I'm just gonna respond, in terms of clustering, if we could utilize some of the existing ponds for detention, it can be done, but our intention is to save all the wetlands in the property and the natural habitat. And if you see where the buildings are placed, literally the majority of the trees are being saved. And the parking area would be probably 200% of what they're showing right now in the master plan.
yeah, and I think those are the kind of details that we'll work through if we see an application in the site plan review process, and that'll be an ongoing discussion. But yeah, again, in concept, I do like the idea of what we're talking about here.
And if I could just put a visual in your head, and we put our city planner hats on. If you look at that piece of property, which is the main piece, right down the middle, the Hinman Farm is to the west. The golf course is down the middle, that's the one that's highlighted in blue. The black dash line is Northridge Drive extended, so that would be the collector street system. Because you need a collector street unless you're doing large, 10 big estate lots on that site, you need some kind of street system to go along with. So that would connect it along our courts. What we did was, we looked at the big blocks, trees, is particularly adjacent to the condos and the plat and the park. And we said, well, if you start to take out those as no developed areas, you have some fairways left, and if the banquet center goes away, that's already developed, which is the orange area, maybe that's where the highest density is on the site. And then the lower densities go down a couple of fairways. And you start to see, hey, we can really plan this site out and really preserve a lot of what's very nice there. But
And instead of having this whole beautiful site covered with these single-family homes, which otherwise would be the use, we then tighten that up, and you're not generating more traffic than you would otherwise, and you are protecting that property. So that, again, I really do like the concept.
Keep in mind that even at gross density, it's 100 units less than what Pulte got approved in 2004. So, but we always try to benchmark the things. The Pulte plan is the benchmark, kind of the old way of doing things, 660. What we're looking at now, if we run the numbers at gross PUD with clustering, would be 576, almost 100 bucks. And then if some of this falls through and some developer came in and they wanted to not do clustering, then we'd be looking at 461. So the overall numbers are low. We're not giving away 1,000 units on this property. We're looking for good design.
Well, and we are committed to two-story buildings, just want to make sure everyone knows that.
I think the concept's good. And, along the east side, the green area, trying to work with what's existing and no businesses. You don't have to go far there to find business, so, there's a lot of good things there, and it goes on the master plan as that. I think it's something that's workable, and I think, like you said, Frank, the numbers are a lot less, and so it worked out to be a win-win for the city and hopefully.
So to call the question, are you okay, generally speaking, with 2 to 4 units per acre on this site, the Angman Farm to the west, and then the Orchardville Church that's on the other side of the expressway? 2 to 4 units an acre would still be low density. However, remember that it's going to give the potential, it's not calling out by right, but the potential to mix uses within that 2 to 4 units. If you are, then we will write it up that way, and we will put a guide of recommended changes to your zoning ordinance in there, so that we start to require this kind of stuff when we're determining density, clustering, etc. Right now, it's a little bit too loose in the zoning code, in my opinion.
Point of information,
Yes.
the orange up there, you're speaking of, that's the event center, that's current construction, that is not part of the concept or proposal here. So are you saying that that would be separately designated as a land use?
No, but that's the area that's already urbanized on the site. So traditionally, when we look at sites like this, we would say, where it's already urbanized, maybe that's where a little bit more density goes. And it could be a focal point for that roundabout too. Maybe that's where they do a building that presents more on the street, that maybe is 3 stories, to take the heat off the rest of the property. Those are the kind of details that we'll look into as this plan goes forward. But from a planning standpoint, we said, hey, don't develop in the green, and we could probably expand that a little bit. But the orange area is already developed. So that's where, if you're gonna do redevelopment, well, it's already concrete, pavement, and rooftop. So maybe that's where there's a little bit more density. Well done, focal point on the roundabout. So that's all we're saying. We're not saying that should be a separate part of the plan, if that's just the urbanized part.
But this green would not be part of the master plan, you're showing the buffers, as an example.
That won't be in the plan, that's just to visualize. If we put this in the plan with the clustering, and we have some graphics that Chris put together in this group, those will end up.
I mean, you can almost lay my plan on that right now, and it works. As a master plan speaking for Tim, if I pass away or die tomorrow, in the comprehensive plan, there should be a difference between large multifamily buildings and small to medium-sized multifamily buildings, not just for this site, for all sites, because it's confusing, and I think people can use that against the city or for the city, and I think there should be a clarification made for her site and other sites. It's not last.
And we'll clean that up, that's currently in the draft, that's the red line that's not good. But
consensus, it's not a decision yes or no, but it's a consensus in the direction that they've described.
Yeah.
Okay.
Watch the website and social media as this thing goes into final public hearing for the master plan. If any application comes in, everyone within 300 feet of that blue boundary gets a card in the mail. So keep your eye out for that. And the interim, talk to those students. You're welcome to stay, but we understand if you don't want to.
Hey,
Will there be a separate addendum or something that, about roads? I've heard the term connectivity in the past. I think for us, and also part of English Hill is kind of assume Chris's role, about connecting to Ipswich and all of a sudden having a flood of traffic going through and everybody here bought private.
I can put it this way. If you were just planning, you would say connect every street. We know that those are generally, typically private streets that you guys are on. We're not going to connect public, right? That's not.
Frank,
And-
even in addition to that, there's not a ton of impetus to take two already developed neighborhoods like that and make that connection, so. I think you guys will be okay.
hey, Frank.
And
One more quick thing is, when I was looking at the plan, the 2020, 2040 plan, it's a bit different than what we were talking about. So I want to make sure that that's not what goes in stone.
No, nothing is in stone. What you saw tonight will be the latest version, and we're going to transfer what we heard tonight into the plan.
Okay.
So it continues to be edited. That's really what it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be set in stone at this point. It's supposed to be edits as these issues go on.
Great, that's good.
Yeah,
Thanks, everybody.
I do want to point out one thing on here that goes to that question, and there's no planned road connection to Coventry anymore.
No,
That's no longer in the plan.
we know what to not get into.
What they're matching is on the
Best practice.
Is the little bitty blue guy right there?
next thing that shows that really
Yeah.
small blue line.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
I don't think there'll ever be any development that would finance that project.
How about we zip through the fence site real quick so we can try to get back on schedule a little bit.
Yeah.
So this was worthwhile. Take it away, Chris.
All right, so the Fensky area, the Fensky Shoemaker area, consists of quite a few parcels, actually, once you put it all together, that look like this on the map. This is your current zoning, basically industrial to the south, agricultural to the north, which encompasses both the houses up there as well as the gravel pit, sand mine? I don't remember what they're mining there. Sand. This is a 2007 sub-area plan that was put together, rural residential to the north, office and industrial to the south. And you can see that road going up to Burton that was discussed and has been opposed tonight. And this is what's currently in the draft plan. Again, it's very similar. It's what the draft plan has instead of truly rural residential is cluster residential. Same low density idea, but the same things we were just talking about, where you can, you instead of, in this case, because this would be single family, instead of 5 acre lots, you're 1 acre lots and 4 acres open space. So that's what we're aiming for there. Either way, low density residential, industrial to the south. You may notice that the line on here is purple, not blue, and that's because that is a bike path connection, not a road connection. As was previously described by Frank, that we took that off the map. So I think this is all kind of well known already. This adds up the potential residential that could be built in the area, which frankly isn't very much because so much of it is non-residential and the densities are so low. Oh, and I will go back. So I guess the question before our two boards tonight is this acceptable for the plan to move forward? To basically keep this site the same as it was in 2007, more or less.
So I will chime in because I know that we've been talking about this for a while and I've got opinions on it. So, what I'll say is that I had a more ambitious vision for this site at a few times, but the realities of what's there, not only the environmental but just the physical
Sure. We intentionally did not use the terms industrial, manufacturing, et cetera, in the plan. And that's because we understand that businesses today run a gamut of everything from manufacturing to research to warehousing to office to maybe some even have a retail component, right? So what we tried to do is get away from those very specific terms and get into the idea that this is an area where a business can flourish no matter which of those zoning categories I just mentioned it ends up in, right? And the difference between enterprise and the community, enterprise community business category is a level of intensity. The enterprise is very open to whatever a business needs to do for its operations. So trucking, if there is noise being generated or something like that, you'd want to see something like that in the enterprise area. Community enterprise, we want to see businesses with a little less impact on their surrounding because they tend to be adjacent or close to residential. So that's the difference.
Well, we use the traditional APA color palette. So if you see gray, you'll say, generally speaking, it's industrial. But then if you look in the plan, you'll see a little bit better explanation. And that's why we changed the mixed uses to red, because really traditionally they're commercial. So we're still keeping the traditional color palette, but expanding the uses. And I'll be honest with you, most of your industrial uses out there, part of the building is, and planning commission sees this all the time, part is office, part is warehouse, part is production, part is shipping. And if you're something like Pelican, you've got a retail desk on top too. So we're not doing anything that really isn't already in place.
Mhm.
It's just calling it out, really is it's more than just a press in the building. So that's the long answer.
Is there anything else on the Fensky area?
So
Yeah, sorry.
basically, we're not really changing too much in this area in terms of zoning.
Really not. Very little change.
It's the same as the 08 plan minus the roads.
Mhm.
Property owners don't want the roads.
And if I may, I'll throw one more caveat into here, and I support the discussion with us leaving as is. I think we have to be extremely cautious because you have not one but two former Superfund land sites, or landfill sites down here. One is on the Kent County side, down at the very bottom of the screen, kind of where that goes downward. And then you have the Ottawa County side as well. There's another Fensky site further up on the other side of Kennewa. And when you look at this, and I've spoken with, I think Mr. Shoemaker had left, both him, Mr. Weller, Mr. Hipma, who all are the majority property owners down there. And without a doubt, I think the messaging has been, this is not going to be something that's going to be developed because it really can't be developed into anything other than what it is. So it's just for future people that's on commission and so forth, if you're looking at this again a few years from now for potential projects, be very cautious with those two landfills. You've got really two that be somewhat impacted by it. So.
Yep, thanks. Are we ready to move on to the next one?
Richmond Farms.
All right, Richmond Farms. So as you know, this is a large piece of land north of Richmond, between Kinney and Elm Ridge, approximately. And like English Hills and some of the others, this is sort of an opportunity site. It's why we call it a significant undeveloped lot. It's a lot of land, right? 240 acres. It actually, as you know, reaches all the way up to 3 Mile. This is your current zoning. You have the single-family residential zoning already in place for a good chunk of the site. And then you have agricultural zoning in what has previously been envisioned, and you'll notice in this plan is still envisioned as kind of a buffer zone. You have multi-family closer to the industrial, also as to buffer that single family, and then you have industrial to the north, which matches what's on either side of it. Frozen up here. 1998 future land use was pretty simple. It was residential to the south, industrial to the north. We've taken a little bit more detailed approach here. But as I said, this is fairly similar to what you just saw in zoning. So you have residential growth 2 to 4 units per acre in the southern half, which again, in this site is probably more likely to be single family. Doesn't necessarily have to be as long as it stays under the 4 acres. And we also designated, as you can see, that it's not going to be a circle, but there is going to be some need to retain park space or open space rather than chock full that area with housing units. To the north, as you get closer to the industrial, we're planning for the density to increase. We're obviously going to have to support that with a road network. That's why you see the extended road going up north to potentially connect to Keyline. We know that there's some impediments to doing that, but still a road connection up in that direction would help support more housing in this area. You then see north of that the buffer zone and a road running through that. We kind of envision that almost as a sort of a parkway, bike path, connecting over to Kinney as a sort of back way out of the neighborhood to reduce traffic impacts on Richmond. And also, of course, to buffer the potential residential from the industrial to the north. And then finally, in the far north, you have industrial that just matches the side to the point where it's hard to even pick out on this map what is the SUL. So I think that's, sort of goes consistent with what's around it. Here's some of the things that went into, I kind of described this stuff already, the ideas that went into why we drafted the map this way. And then this is what you're looking at as far as residential development potentially at these density levels. And you are talking about quite a few units, right? Over 1,000 if we develop it out to the maximum density planned for. That said, this is one of the few remaining sites of this size in a location that has infrastructure, it has jobs nearby, et cetera. So with that, I'll throw it out to the group as to whether you think this is the direction you want to go with the plan. And I'll bring it back to the map here if I can. There. Oop. There.
Can I make a recommendation? Whole site should be 2 to 4. Make that 4 to be that. Overloads the property.
I agree.
So for some context for folks, we've talked about this site, we actually had some planning commission hearings on it. And the developer split the property in two, and there was a lot of active discussion about whether that top part should be 2 to 4 or 4 to 8. And the idea behind the 4 to 8 is you're going to be butting up to some pretty heavy industrial properties there. But you do have that existing kind of buffer zone that probably won't get developed anyways. So I don't disagree with Frank that 2 to 4 probably makes sense. And again, the big issue from the neighborhood was the idea of the density and putting it out onto Richmond where there's existing kind of traffic issues, whether you go to Kinney or the other way to Elmridge, and trying to figure out how to disperse that density and while creating a good, solid traffic network of connectivity between these roads. And that's where we talk about making sure that road gets up to Keyline Drive. But I guess I would say that switching 2 to 4 makes sense as long as we protect that space between the property and the industrial, and as long as we make sure that we get that connection to Keyline Drive in before we fill that site, because that's a major issue for those folks in the second ward who are living in the area.
Well, I think it's important to reinforce too, the developer agreed to that.
Yep.
That connection has to be, there's been some grumbling about, we get started on this quicker if we didn't have to do the road. That's tough. We agree to it. That's unwavering, and I just encourage both groups that we don't move that needle at all. They have to get that road in.
In regards to the 4 to 8 though, wasn't there some discussion on that where having those buildings along that buffer was actually going to be a positive thing if there were larger buildings just to block sound? And I remember talking exactly the way you were saying it, but I think we had
the
Okay.
developer will drive that a little bit. If you can't sell residential 2 to 4 up against industrial. I remember kind of the discussion was that we talked about the 4 to 8 is a buffer between 2 to 4 and the industrial.
Yeah, we were using that stuff.
Right.
You even mentioned some possible apartments back there,
Yeah.
apartment buildings, so.
That would be the one advantage of leaving it at 4 to 8, but maybe take the line and push it a little bit.
I was just gonna ask that, like, can't we just, like, I think the idea of buttons on here, makes sense. And then I was just wondering, can we just push it a little smaller?
Well, I remember initially, when we were having those discussions, the line was further north than this, probably by like half. So,
Yeah.
And then we can do that, that's no problem.
It's not a fixed line, I mean,
right, and then that's the other part, you're right.
it's flexible.
Yeah, right now it's at the property line, because there's 2 parcels there, but that's as arbitrary as anything else. We can draw it in the north, closer to where the zoning line is, if that makes more sense to everybody.
Drop with a fuzzy line.
And that's, hey, you know, we can do that too. We could have a section that's hatched. That's gonna visually be interesting, but it certainly conveys the idea. All right.
Now, that area, the crosshatched area that has the 13 on it,
Yeah,
the way you have presented this concept right here, would that be used towards the gross density of the cluster?
yes. Yeah, that would be used towards gross density, but we wouldn't want to see buildings, housing units of any type built within a buffer zone. Whether it would exactly look like that, I don't know, but it would be just like in English Hills where we said, this is the buffer zone, and the building, you know, the housing units stay out of it, but then that does count towards the density calculation.
If it counts towards the density, that might be more responsive to the developer's desire to get a yield out of the overall property. Which is, I think that type of a trade-off, I think you were describing as being a way to step back there. And when they talk about community character, you could have larger buildings like they described for multifamily, for rental, but if you work it into the community character, allow the larger ones in that area, again, that would be in line with the prior discussions.
I think either way, we ended that discussion with this is okay because industrial's already there, so people that are moving into this already know the industrial. It's not going the other way around.
It's always getting caught off guard.
Yeah, and if you can leave it, if you move it, you can hash out as it comes in.
I think there was a lot of talk about Royal Vista Apartments and the success there. And it's a very similar thing. If this connection goes north, and you take all of those cars to the north, and it seems to coexist together, that was an interesting way to let them have a little more density, but then to build the road.
Well, I like the idea of having options for housing too, like to have some multi-family housing. This is our residents and look at that. Yeah, exactly. Opportunity to somehow over down situations, build it in a different way. It's more of a traditional neighborhood rather than these kind of pockets. About what they're talking about, you know, young families, young professionals, and it could be a place where they start out, for retirees or, I like the idea of mixing there.
So we can go ahead and move that line north if that's the consensus. I guess we had 2 things thrown out. We had eliminate it entirely or move it north. So where are we landing?
I'd say just leave it where it is until we get a proposal. I'm looking at the aerial photography there in the northwest corner, there's a great big large area of wetlands. I don't see that reflected in there.
Well, I suppose that's another option is we can take that wetland and put it in the green hashing so that forcing the 4 to 8 to cluster even more.
Right,
that's an option too.
What I would say, Chris, I guess, is that if we can move that line just a touch up, not because I think that we need more of that to be 2 to 4 per se, but just to signify that we don't want this we're not thinking that this property has to be that 4 to 8 density. We don't need that whole property to be that 4 to 8 density, because I don't want that message conveyed.
That's a
So if
good
we can
point.
at least get it across that property line, that conveys that there's a flexibility that we're not tied to these lines. Does that
I
make
don't
sense?
see that to be on the property line for you.
Yeah, they split that property in half.
Yeah, it's the property line you see here in blue.
Yeah, I think we did
Is-
that split when we approved that first phase of that project.
It won't go
But the,
there.
that process does not follow the property.
No, it doesn't. It's not, it's really just a straight line buffer. I don't know exactly how wide it is, 600 feet or something like that.
Yeah,
But
sorry.
the 4 to 8 line, the southern boundary of the 4 to 8 is a property line right now.
That's what I was talking about.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I would support moving it a little bit north, and that way you're breaking up the mental kind of idea that this property is this, that it's more residential.
Right.
You know, yeah.
Well, wouldn't it, if it went to planning commission, like Pheasant and Maple Road, some of them existing homes there, wouldn't they get a buffer zone also, not just the industrial?
Well, it depends
Yeah,
on the
they've
way
had-
we develop it, right? Because if it could or it could not, because if we connected the street network and we have it as more single-family residential homes, it might just build in like more parts of the same neighborhood.
Right,
Mhm.
but I mean, if you're gonna go from 4 to 8, you may want,
Yeah, I would almost say that we could follow that road that comes into the development to the north and use that more as a line than the actual property line, if you guys see what I'm saying there.
If we
Yeah.
apply the same methodology that we just used on the sheds, look at the aerial photo. Farms in the middle, so that's already open and essentially urbanized, correct? But wetland, there's something wet in here, this is wet, this is wet. So if you start to green out some of these areas, but we use the PUD gross density for clustering, then you can design this site better than just go in and knock down all the trees. You know, because not all of this is wet. So that's where the flexibility comes in, but that's also why I'm a little bit concerned about overloading these properties. Because as we just saw in the chills, 2 to 4 is gonna reach 525 units. It's low density, it still allows for the mixture of housing types in the 2 to 4 unit category. But you don't have someone come in and say, well, I can get 8 units per acre on there. Because when I zoom out and I look at our road infrastructure in this part of town, it's not real good. It's kind of old Grand Rapids infrastructure. So, and I personally think that the connection to Keyline is, I don't know if any of us are gonna see that, even the youngsters in the room, that's really expensive. Something's gonna have to come up with a couple of $1 million without much return to get Keyline. So, that all the traffic, you can get 2 points on Richmond, but it's still not gonna run in Richmond, or on these other subdivision streets. You're still going to the collector on Richmond. Hopefully you'll get to 3 miles, but I don't know what the realistic cost is. But to keep things moving, what I'm hearing is you move that, what is it, 6 to 8 further up?
4 to 8, yeah.
4 to 8, yeah, maybe line it up with Maplebrook, where that comes in, just so that we're off of that property line. Does that make sense, Chris?
Yeah. So, and we didn't draw in an extension of Maplebrook, but obviously that is a stub street that could potentially cross the power line corridor and then become a collector street in the neighborhood. Of course, we have to deal with the impacts on the existing neighborhood, but, and there was talk of buffer along the west, and I do think that we should probably draw that in where the 4 to 8 is adjacent to an existing neighborhood. That makes sense to me. There is the power line corridor, though, which kind of helps with that, right?
So really, we end up with a pretty tight space for that 4 to 8 zone anyways, but.
Yeah, it's gonna be constrained in by buffers and such.
Maybe move it up to the south end of the consumer's property and straight across.
Maple.
Something like that, or Maplebrook.
Got some acres in there.
Yeah, and that consumer's property probably, well, I mean, are we comfortable with that being labeled enterprise? Because it kind of juts in. It's kind of funny.
It's that fee-owned area, actually, it's that whole north-south, it's yellow.
Yeah, it's
There's
just, it's like a widened,
So
so we'll clean that up.
Okay, we got 20 after 8. Here's my proposal. Let's do what we can do. And then if there's a couple of more that need to be done, we can do that at a separate meeting. Because once you get to 90 minutes in a meeting at this time of night, you know, we'll go to 8, but I don't want to burn you guys out. We all have lives, right? So let's see what else we can get done here. Here's a big one. Probably the only opportunity in the city to maybe be a little bit downtown creative. So I'll let Chris handle this one.
Sure, so we threw out the name West Standdale for this, which is not very creative or used by anybody, but it is basically the land behind Myers, behind Blaine's. As you can see right now, most of it's zoned agricultural, some portions of it are zoned commercial, and the only real development on it right now is Goodwill, right? But it does have a Laker Line station. The Ferndale Laker Line station is right on this property. So that does present a few opportunities. And if the,
See that new right-of-way that the city commission just adopted between Meyer and Blaine's? Step 1.
yep, so that creates, so you have the Lake Michigan Drive frontage, and you also have Standdale Crossing coming into the site. There we go. The current future land use has a CPUD that takes up about the northern half of the site, then office, then high-density residential. The new plan is much more residential heavy. So it really pushes the commercial, or in this case, it's actually designated as mixed use, neighborhood corridor, functionally neighborhood commercial plus residential maybe on top, all the way up to a 300-foot buffer from Lake Michigan Drive. And then south of that, residential at 4 to 8 units per acre. And this is described in words in the plan, in the way, and also in this drawing that I'm about to show you, as the density should be more intense and higher to the north, closer to the mixed use, closer to Lake Michigan Drive, closer to Laker Line Station, and then become less intensive and less dense as it goes south. And this drawing, I think, shows this pretty well. You have the mixed use commercial area to the north, which does pull back off of Lake Michigan Drive a little bit to create either a gathering space or at least something that where you could have maybe some outdoor dining or something, and you're not right on Lake Michigan Drive, but you still have that commercial or mixed use land use. Then immediately to the south of that, you have multifamily. As you can see, there is some preserved wetland and some sort of a central gathering place park area there, which is noted as a bioswale because it's also potentially for drainage. And then as you get further to the south, you see single-family lots. Obviously, this is just a conceptual drawing, but we didn't do conceptual drawings this detailed for every site. And this one we're hoping will generate ideas for developers that they'll then replicate. So again, this labels the number of units you could potentially get out of each site. Obviously, all these are going to have to be combined because they're just long, thin parcels, not really developable in their current state. But with that, the question is to the boards, is this an acceptable plan going forward?
Yeah, so, I've got thoughts here. We've seen, I remember a while back, we saw the Emery Hill proposal here, is what it was, right? And that kind of is reflected in our master plan from 2007, and now, this represents a pretty significant change, in that we're focusing a lot more on that residential density. My thoughts are that I would really like to see that commercial push farther into the site. My thinking is that the commercial corridors we have exist Island University, from the Laker line, and have people have a sense of place in this development, where they can spend actual time, where it's more of a place to be than stopping by the place you need to go. Does that kind of make sense to everyone? And basically what I would be saying is if we can push that line instead of using that 300 feet that we're using elsewhere in the district, further back into the development so that we can really have an opportunity to create something, have enough there so it's a place to be. I guess that's what I would be looking to see changed from where we're at right now. I think the mixed use buffering to Meyer is not a bad way to zone that, but really even if we're just cutting into that side where we have the residential growth zone, would I think help a lot so that we can, put something there that is a place that we're going to be able to capture some of that traffic that we should be getting from that Laker line, have a place for people to go and spend time in the city versus having places that people will stop by on their way home or this or that. I guess that's my opinion. Others can contribute their thoughts.
I agree with that. I think we need to have a destination place there rather than just all this residential. I think, since we have, that's right between us, Grand Valley, I think that's gonna be a good spot for, the Laker line to drop the kids off and go do things, not necessarily live there, but go do things, make it a destination. So yeah, I agree with that. I agree pushing it back down. I kind of wish there was a road behind Meyer so we could put businesses, so the back of businesses could go up against the back of Meyer, and then we could just reroute that road and make it a little bit different, but who knows?
So we can definitely expand that mixed-use commercial area further south and maybe even further south in the farthest east portion of the site. So it's in behind Myers. So it's kind of an upside-down L, if that makes sense. If that's the consensus. And that will, I think that the sort of the text we have in the plan about this area is consistent with what you guys are talking about in terms of creating a destination. We've just made it very residential heavy, which is not necessarily what the map has to look like.
We have to have a tunnel dug underneath Wilson to go to Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, there you go. The tunnel under Myers, yeah.
Subway.
Chick-fil-A will want to use this entire site as drive-through staging. All right. Is that the consensus then? Expand that area?
I guess, old school, destination station. I mean, I'm going out by I got a place I'm gonna go to. I'm not going there to hang out. And so I look at, look at the traffic and the size of the intersection of Wilson, like Michigan, and it's like, I guess my age group isn't going there to hang out, but maybe yours is. Can you explain that to
And I think that the point is well made that you're not going to put like something like that on Lake Michigan Drive. It's too busy. It has to be off Lake Michigan Drive, right? It has to
But
be.
that's where we talk about that internal site circulation, that's kind of part of the importance of and you talk about that big intersection, Dan, at Lake Michigan Drive and Wilson. That's part of the importance of this development, is that we start to better utilize that New Stanley Crossings Road and Ferndale to offset some of that traffic, where we have traffic signals at both sides, and it helps to alleviate that pressure to people going different directions and take other ways out.
If you guys, obviously, the Village of Ada has been there forever, but the expanded Village of Ada, right? It's not on Fulton. It's not on M21. It's right off of it. Maybe that's a model to look at here.
And that isn't a naturally driven development either.
Well, that's true. I mean, somebody bought, well, the one block village, right? And then Amway bought everything around it and built a bigger village.
Families
Yeah.
are driving everything.
That's true. This, of course, is a completely undeveloped site, so if there is interest in doing that, it's going to take that kind of money, right? And that kind of vision.
We respect that kind of development there,
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, but I think from a planning perspective, we have to set the table, because if we don't set the table, then no one's going to eat at the table at all, right? If we just say, if we took what was in the old plan, which is basically another big box, which I don't think we're likely to get either, then I don't think we're kind of setting ourselves up to just have to sit there for a while.
I think there is some potential. You have the development on the east side of Wilson. That backside is walkable or bikeable over there. But I don't know if that demographic in there is going to drive that kind of business. I don't know.
I've been to places, I'm looking, to me, it's a developer where they're gonna put in get these different food shops, and then you have an area, and you can go buy an ice cream cone and sit there, or you can go in here and get your lunch and sit out here. They've got canopies, they've got umbrellas, they got chairs, whatever, what have you, in different areas. But basically, the way Standale set up, everybody had to rent the bus because there wouldn't be any place to park it there. So I guess I see that coming from the developer more so maybe than from us. But I've lived in Virginia, near Washington D.C. They got areas, and there's grocery stores, and there's banks there, and then back here there's a strip, and you can get oriental food, you can get all kinds of things. But the area where you're going to eat, it's huge. So I guess, I don't know, I see where that part of it, maybe not so much the other kid experience. The shops and what it's going to draw and how it would be set up.
I think what the plan is trying to do here, even if we pull that NC category south of 300 feet, we'll keep the illustrative or the stylistic plan in there, so that at least you're getting the message out. If someone wants to come in and do something differently, the city's going to be open to that. And that's really what Chris is talking about as far as setting the table a little bit. So it's more than just we're looking for a box there. If you want to be creative here, this is one of those sites that maybe it'll work. When you put all the pieces together, all the variables, yeah, maybe it will. Who knows? 20-year plan, right?
I think one thing, if I can add to this, I'll just build on what Commissioner Gilbert had shared, is if I can quote our city engineer to think big. We have to, we've talked about similar places. There's one in Carmel, Indiana. There's one in Perrysburg, Ohio, that I used to frequent quite a bit for work, and had an office a mile down the road and stayed there. That sense of community you can have in a place like this, it is perfectly sculpted. I don't think you could put anything, there's really not much you can't do with the site, so I would just encourage both sets of commissions, think big here, and let's not get caught in that box trap, but just slap in some big box in there. There's a lot of opportunity here.
May I ask a question?
Sure. Either that or the developer sets something up on the private side, but one or the other, there has to be a ongoing maintenance with a clear funding source and someone in charge.
Good.
Yeah, I think,
Pull the NC down another 300 feet, keep the stylistic plan in there.
Mhm.
So,
maybe pull it down another 600 on the far east or something like that, so it's next to Myers. Moving on. Lincoln Lawns. I know this has been a subject of discussion in the last few months. Lincoln Lawns, both the golf course, which is highlighted here, and then the bowling alley and clubhouse area, is currently zoned agricultural, which means zoning-wise, it's wide open. My button's not working. There. Future land use previously was low-density residential for the whole site. What we have in the draft plan right now keeps that low density. Now we're calling it residential growth 2 to 4, of course, for most of the site. As you may be aware, in the southeast corner, you have both a wetland, and then on the other side of the property line and the other side of the city line in Grand Rapids, there's an apartment complex. So that's why you have that. We kind of carved out this corner of, well, there could be a little higher density in this area as well as preserved open space. So that's a little different than the rest of the site, which is sort of, well, we probably want single family similar to what's around it. Also to note here, along Lake Michigan Drive is another 300-foot strip of mixed use. Now, most of the Lake Michigan Drive corridor is designated as some form of mixed use, I think for obvious reasons, right? It's a busy corridor, bus line, et cetera. But that, that's sort of still up for discussion here, whether that's realistic or needed in this particular location. Some pros and cons here. This is another site that has a Laker line station right adjacent to it. It's another, like Richmond Farms, it's a big site that can be used for more residential. It also, of course, has existing neighborhoods around it, which have to be considered, and we may see some issues potentially with stormwater. So, and Frank has put together another one of these clustering diagrams calling out where the wetlands and stuff are located and where maybe we don't want to where we don't want to develop. He's also taken a little bit different approach to the road connections than the plan does in its conceptual form. This is, I think, kind of an interesting idea that we kind of kicked around, where roads connect. You actually have two developments with a road network like this. One would be an extension of Maple Row and Custerer, which would then come together, and then that's just an extension of that neighborhood. Then you connect with just bike trails to an extension of the Lincoln Lawns neighborhood. So instead of one neighborhood, you're really building two connected with bike trails. So
that's Steve's idea, by the way. Steve can talk about that.
and I think it's a cool idea, and I think it gets at some of the, it creates connectivity without creating through traffic. So I think there's some cool stuff in that idea. So with that, the question is to the boards, whether you guys think this is an appropriate way to plan out this likely to be developed soon site.
Yeah, I can just elaborate on that connection up to the north end of the site. I think that at the first blush, we had heard some really negative feedback from those who were in those long-standing existing neighborhoods about the idea of pushing what would be a very large development through their neighborhood. And the way those roads are designed, it would really potentially be a problem if fast-coming traffic was moving through there. But I still really didn't want to see those cul-de-sacs stick as long as they are, and the problems that can come with that in the city. So that was kind of why I suggested just bringing that around so that you connect the existing neighborhood at some of the density there, but very little bit in the grander scheme of things. And then building out that neighborhood on the rest of the site would make sense to me. Now, I guess the main point of discussion is the commercial side.
The commercial and the higher density in the southeast corner.
Right. Well, I think the commercial on the frontage makes all the sense in the world to me, as long as there's some developer who wants to put it there and not Yeah, you're a little ways off of that stop, I think, there.
How far is, yeah, I was wondering, where is the
It's,
stop?
it's at Maynard,
At Maynard.
yeah.
Oh,
So it's, well, and there's also one at the Standale Trail, so actually you're kind of halfway
You're
between
like
two.
set in the
Yeah.
middle of them.
so I mean, that's certainly possible.
Yeah, it's not impossible.
It's definitely an option, and then if you have that, mixed use, whatever the smaller, whatever the neighborhood node right there, and you can have the little convenience store shops, whatever, small grocery or something along those lines, that, then it's a perfect setup for easy, again, and easy to walk there, so we have those, next to the other, to Bay Point, is that Bay Point?
Favorite point.
Favorite Point, next to that, kind of again, it kind of eases in, and then we've got a little bit more into residential, but again, there's an option for people who might wanna just kind of have a car, which again is, trends that we're seeing, people who, they're not driving in town, they wanna be in areas that are, accessible and close to downtown, and maybe a lot of value in setting up those events like that. I would support higher density housing.
Okay. So do we have consensus? Is there someone who would like to change what we've got here? Or should we change these blue conceptual roads to match Steve's idea a little better? Okay.
Is that a yes?
I saw some nodding.
Yeah.
Now, there was a graphic here as far as landscape trail connections.
Yeah.
I think there would be the benefit of having a connection back to the west to the Niagara Trail.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that,
If this would work for me, I could bring that up.
You did here, you go through the street, you go through Maple Road, there's a connection off of 10th Street to that trail, so you don't have to go out to this Lincoln Lawns, I live right there, so you could just get out that way, it's only like 2 blocks, instead of creating a directly out of this thing.
Well,
Mhm.
my point is that the more connections we have, I think the better connected the neighboring, the existing neighborhood will be able to connect to it more easily, rather than through somebody's backyard.
Well, it's on the street, and there's a, anyway, yeah, either way, it's fine, I mean, it's only 1 block difference of where you're talking about, you go 1 block north, there's an entrance off of 10 onto the
Yeah.
trail.
Yeah.
So either way, it's fine.
Okay. Yeah, I think so, and we would just draw it sort of as a conceptual dotted line, so it could pop in here, there, wherever it makes sense when there's a development. Taking into account the existing residents and what's going to be built.
I don't know how the planning commission works, so if I'm disrupting you, I apologize. I live on Fairway, Lincoln Lawns, and the development of the golf course does concern me. If you could put the map up there with the road layout, I'd appreciate it. Yeah.
That one?
Right now, there's only one way in and out of that subdivision. And when we have the students going to class, you can sit there for quite a while.
Mhm.
Now, I see the blue line at the top. Does that mean that it'll empty out into the subdivision to go to Lake Michigan Drive, or is that just a definition error?
Well, so as drawn here, and again, the roads wouldn't necessarily be exactly where these lines are, but they're supposed to illustrate connections. As drawn here, a new road would come north, connect to the existing neighborhood, and you'd be able to get up to Leonard. And yes, you'd be able to come down from Leonard and get to Lake Michigan Drive too. So you have a little bit of both. You also would have that east-west connection that's drawn on there, so you'd have another way out to Lake Michigan from your neighborhood. But what we were just talking about, which was originally proposed by Commissioner Gilbert and discussed in a meeting with staff and consultants and is drawn here, would replace that north-south connection with just a bike path. So that the Maple Row and Custer Row, the 2 roads that come down and end, they'd be extended, but they'd only connect to each other. So that creates a public safety, there's a public safety improvement there because you don't have long dead ends anymore. They'd connect now, but they don't connect to your neighborhood. They would only connect to a bike path. But you would by this, in this conceptual idea, you'd get a second way out of your neighborhood to Lake Michigan Drive. You would get that. So that's what this shows.
Thank you for allowing me to interrupt you.
If I lived in either one of those neighborhoods, I'd like that a lot better than the original.
As a road guy, I think you should, I would like those connections too. The more redundancy you have, spread the traffic out. I know it's pretty concentrated on. John pointed out, there's only one way out of there, I didn't realize that. But I looked at the map, I would not like living there.
Yeah, I think a second way out of there is pretty important.
Big access
Second or third. Yeah.
All of that is a valuable thing to have.
So maybe the compromise would be is where the arrow is, say, landscape trails, have that as the road connection, and then maybe the other red lines. So that way you're at least getting it, but you're forcing people that go way down, to try to limit the amount of people wanting to be agree with it.
And those people that are north are gonna say, well, we're gonna get all the traffic. It's good, if we have both, we'll spread it out.
Well, and I think that there may be something to the idea of designing the roads like this and then having just a little one-block connection, which is to say you could drive from Leonard to Lake Michigan Drive, but you're going to make 3 turns. It's not faster. It's not a cut through. It's not. It's just possible, right?
Well, that's where I was throwing
Yeah.
initial, but what Tom's saying is that if you've got 20 cars, they're all going there, whereas if you get the other one, you make out 10.
That's true.
And you have a good point, that you can make it where there's a jig jog in there as a straight shot. You come down and where the red line is, you make it there, you gotta make a right turn, then you gotta make a left turn, then you gotta make a left turn again to make a right turn to get out. People will quickly realize that, you know what, I'm just gonna go Leonard Street, because that's the way I always went, and that's quick.
Yeah.
And if you wanna get to Lake Michigan Drive, you go down to Kenny and you have traffic.
All right. So well, do we have consensus, I guess, on the question of should there be a road connection between a hypothetical development on Lincoln Lawns and the neighborhood to the north in some fashion, right? Because this doesn't show it, the other one does.
I will vote for 2 connections.
2 connections.
I think, Tom, I'm gonna throw caution to the wind. I mean, I will support the connection. Spending a lot of time over the years in the neighborhood, block parties in there, knocking on doors in those neighborhoods. I can tell you for a fact, the majority of the neighborhoods to the north and to the south of the proposed development, where at least in the Marlboro neighborhoods and the Sunrise Sunset. I'm thinking of for Melanie and Elena for Leah Hopa's his community night out that he does every year. I can tell you unequivocally, the majority of the people in both neighborhoods like the neighborhoods with one connection. So I want to be cautious of, there's going to be pushback from that. So for me, it's a public safety issue, having connectivity. That's a logical piece, but I don't want to assume these people would like more exits and egresses, or rather, they definitely do not want them.
Yeah, I understand that, but from a public safety standpoint
Right.
and from a connectivity standpoint, as a planning commissioner, I'm gonna advocate for that. Might get shot down, but
Well, and I think it's a fair point, because it's one of the things that we even struggle discussing, like with Northridge right now, and that connectivity up there, on an industrial aspect of it. From a public safety, you get some type of blockage coming in off of Lincoln Lawns, and we can't get fire trucks, police cars, that's a real problem. And that could happen in the winter, it could happen in the summer, it doesn't matter. So, we're gonna need to make those connections. I want us to be cautious, because the pulse of those neighborhoods is they like the neighborhoods with one connection. I hear you loud and clear, support the connections.
I'm not running for election, so I can vote.
Yeah. All good.
Me too.
Yeah, I think I'm what I'm hearing is that we want to move forward with showing connections, but what's currently on the plan that shows a straight line that you might go 50 miles an hour on, we want to get rid of that and show something that's a little bit that shows that we connect into a neighborhood, and then you have to navigate the neighborhood, and then you connect to another neighborhood, and then you have to navigate the neighborhood, and then finally you're at Lake Michigan Drive, that kind of thing.
And I think like the Maple Road connection, not to get into the weeds, but that stuff
It comes all the way to the property
Exactly,
line.
Exactly, so. All right, I'll be quiet for a second.
For those of you that know my day job, we are now putting signs at the end of these stubs and these temporary cul-de-sacs with a sign that said, this road is intended to go on somewhere. So
I love
nobody can
that.
say, well, the realtor said this is the end, this road would never go through. Road commission puts a sign there that says, this road is intended to go through.
That's a really good
I think that's
idea.
fantastic.
I'm glad you guys are doing that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. I think it's gonna make a lot of people's lives easier.
That's all right. We have a full service sign shop.
Just
Just
replace
replace them every day.
Well, and I think too, as city leaders, we're being disingenuous because we're having multiple conversations with developers right now about the need for connectivity. There's been some pushback and them having to invest in those roads. We said we're not going to allow these stubs anymore to take place. And I think we're disingenuous if we're not following through on a residential aspect as well. It's the same concept.
And I'll just say that my goal here was just to make sure that we had at least secondary access to it, right? Everyone gets a secondary access here, but I do understand the value and the importance of getting connectivity through these neighborhoods and to connect these neighborhoods, so.
Well, one of the things I've noticed over the years, over on the east side of the state, they develop big parcels of land, and you have multiple ways through this big parcel, but nobody gets a gut shot right straight through. You have to go in, you have to make a left turn and a right turn, and then you go another block, and you gotta make another turn. So everybody is in their whole little area. You can navigate all through it, but you can't go just straight.
So they're all Alpine states.
Right.
What's that?
Basically,
What, this may be one site that you say, hey, you know what, the roads that need to go in there need to be designed to be complete streets. So you use traffic calming, you use neck downs, little roundabouts, to keep them from being straight cut throughs. Because if we just go with traditional street design, they're 6 feet wide, maybe with a curve, and they accommodate cars going very quickly. So this may be something where you could, if you keep the connectivity to roads, there should be noted in there that the road design really needs to be traffic calming driven and complete streets driven. So that you avoid having the cut through opportunities.
So moved.
Got it.
54, Frank.
But the last couple are very easy. So if we move through, you should go very quickly and we'll be done on time.
All right, I'm going to describe these pretty quickly. This is several big parcels that all are right along O'Brien Street on the south side. They're currently zoned, what was that, agricultural. They're currently, the 1998 plan is just rural residential. And similar to what we talked about on the Fensky site, we took that concept and turned it into a cluster concept, same low density. We know that there's opportunities to develop in this area, but there's also major impediments in terms of natural features and infrastructure. And so basically keeping these at a low density that preserves natural beauty. As you can see in the aerial with the clearly the wetlands and the woodlands, as well as some slopes. The entire idea here would be to preserve those while potentially allowing houses to be built in and around them. So do we have consensus on that, or is there any discussion?
Summary is no change. If the developers, or if the property owners that want to sell, they'll have the option to do cluster. You go right to that aerial photo, just like we did the Eagle Show site. See that area that's farmed? That's where the home should go, protect the natural.
Yep.
1 unit per acre density.
private utilities.
Water mains available there, sewer's not so good.
Is there, will area work?
Some of it may, some of it's probably gonna wanna be those 1 acre and bigger lots, just because it's not gonna, you're not gonna be able to put the density in there to support lots of septics.
So that's your lowest density housing. Because pretty much in South Walker, you don't have all the utilities.
Yeah. This parcel got pulled out because it's sort of separate from the others, but it's the exact same idea, and it's even on O'Brien. Under 1 unit per acre, save the natural features. In this case, you got a big wetland and a bunch of trees, so same idea. Any opposition? All right.
1 unit per acre. That's all.
No, that's great. Can you go back to Lincoln Lawn, Stevie's slide?
Uh-oh, here we go.
Put a roundabout right here, Frank, run this one over, and run this one over on that one. Run one.
We sketched that out when they were first talking about that site, that you need to have the roundabouts and the deck downs and all the big street stuff that we talked about. Because that site's relatively flat and there's not a lot of natural features except for the areas that we showed in green. So, again, I think that's where we need to really notate in the plan that street connectivity is there, but it just can't be straight 36 feet or
I'll agree to that.
Great.
we're almost done.
Yep. Went through that one. Number 28. This is at, what, Cummings and O'Brien, approximately. This is another one that is currently zoned single family, was previously planned low density residential. We continue to plan it low density residential, 2 to 4. There's not a lot of complex road connections or anything here. It's just a potential residential parcel. Any questions on that one?
No change.
Yep. This one is on Bristol, south of 3 Mile. It's kind of a long, skinny one. It's currently zoned ag. It was planned before light industrial office up to a residential buffer on the residences to the east. We've extended the residential further back and lined up the industrial, or what we call commercial, or excuse me, community enterprise with the industrial to the west. There's houses along 3 Mile. We have that planned for the future as mixed use. It's purple on here, it should be red. And then south of that line would be residential. So does anyone have any issues with just sort of shifting the line on this parcel a little bit?
Have they got in or anything?
They get an annual sand mining license or permit from the city for mineral mining. They do have a redevelopment plan that's required in chapter 34, generally consistent with what you see on the plan there. They have a little bit more industrial. I don't think it's gonna hurt to show that RG 2 to 4 a little bit further west for mapping purposes.
Dan, they did come in briefly to talk about a senior assisted living property or development, but that didn't, I think, come to fruition.
We vetted that one out. That was,
There were some barriers between what they wanted and what we thought was feasible.
and what they were really selling.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, there's no big change there now.
No.
from what it was.
Not really, just kind of moving a line. That's a fluid line anyway. Come on.
Battery, you want me to use this one? There we go.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Battery knows it's 8 o'clock.
Battery knows, shutting down.
All right, these two, this is the Versluis Orchards and the property next to it. So I don't know how likely this is to be developed anytime soon. But, yeah, Frank, do you mind grabbing your mouse? This one is dead.
So the Versluises haven't yet shown any interest in developing these lots.
Yeah, they're currently zoned single family. Currently planned low density. New plan says low density, but does give that Lake Michigan Drive frontage the opportunity to mixed use or commercial. Any concerns with that? Okay. Next. These two are in the Richmond and Wilson area. They are funny shapes. Go ahead. They're currently zoned single family. They're planned single family before. We've planned them for single family this time. So again, no change. Any
Winchester Woods,
yeah.
no change.
A couple more just to the west of there, near what is that, Leonard and Wilson, right by the West Michigan Environmental Academy. Currently zoned ag, previously planned low-density residential, in the new plan, low-density residential again. So again, is there any opposition to that? Okay.
Talking about a small commercial on the bottom of that one, on the corner. I thought at some point in time, I think this might be a ways back. Are we drawing a circle on there?
Doc, are you thinking on the other corner?
Yeah.
I think you're in the farm.
Yeah.
Well, it's fine.
This farm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that-
You're
that's-
on the other,
I'm
yeah.
on the wrong side.
You're in the right area, just the other side of this.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all right.
Sorry, I whipped through it.
I'm getting there.
Again, that area, we're at the 2 hour mark there.
I think we're,
So what you're, Doc, what you're thinking of is in that bottom corner where the purple is, at the very bottom of that long vertical purple, right where the mouse is moving, that's that general area of the proposed commercial area.
To your point, which maybe wasn't your intended point, I just wonder if there might be, thinking 20 years into the future, would there be an opportunity for some mixed use there? Because you do have the, the mobile health parks are right there, you've got the doctor's office on the outside. You could maybe be, heading back directly at people, if there was something there, it would keep people from having to go up to Wilson and like Michigan Drive, would accommodate, over the challenge. I think one of the things that we're kind of lacking are these more neighborhood tucked in convenience stores, gas stations, and just things that you can get to, especially in that area, there's just really nothing. Going on to Wilson and, neighborhoods of kids and families, and they just don't have it all. Just pick that up, so,
Oh, they,
might not be bad for the city to talk to.
wasn't there something proposed for this whole big corner?
Gas stations approved here.
Right now, but I'm thinking on the other side of the school, away from Wilson, where you're not going out on a busy street, and it's more of a, especially with the school right there and things like that, it might help push people to the west instead of towards Wilson, if there was something commercial on that other side.
Well, I don't know about commercial, but
which slide?
Well, there's you, but
Yeah, ask Frank, he's got a working mouse.
the wrong terminology, but,
Yeah, sorry, I was.
Yeah,
because we're talking about west of the school, right?
Yes.
yeah.
Between us and Talmadge.
I don't know that necessarily, from my perspective, I don't think it hurts anything to put a little red blob there. Doesn't mean it has to be built that way, but it would give an opportunity, whereas this doesn't.
Well, I don't think the school is going this place. It's only, it will only get bigger, and it's only 283 now, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, if they add high school, then the gas station across the street will clean up,
Yeah.
right?
Well, you have Lewis Farms, there's potential there for, and they're hot to cross Wilson, but
Well, that's what I'm saying, that's what give them an option, and people coming in, I mean, it just keeps people from having to go all the way to Wilson, which is already, as you know, hard.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is that in the Lewis Farms development, we do have a pretty sizable proposed commercial development. So it would, I don't disagree with what you're saying, that there could be value to having something that's like separate
It is a concept that we maybe should start, this is sort of germinating as a concept, because it's coming out of these stay-home orders and stuff, right, for COVID, and that is that with more people working at home, and so that creates a customer base that used to be somewhere else in the middle of the day and is now not. We're not talking gigantic shopping center, but the opportunity to have an ice cream joint or a convenience store is within walking distance of a little of a neighborhood, so that you're like 95% residential and 5% commercial, right? Is something that I think is worth looking into.
Did we have how many acres that was, that person?
Yeah.
Chris, you get it?
That might have-
So no, I didn't.
It's 61 total.
Maybe a little bit more than that.
Maybe better to put the neighborhood note on the south side of the street. That way you're not crossing out Leonard as well.
There's an empty spot there as well.
Yeah, you're kind of reading my mind. I get the concept and understanding and support, thinking ahead there.
This is a 55 zone, there's no crossing there, it's a rural section. So if you wanted to put some kind of a neighborhood node with the mobile home parks and duplexes on the south side of the street, maybe you put it in here or in here. Because I wouldn't really want to encourage
Right.
walking across that street.
Quite frankly, with the, maybe with the change in township supervisor will improve, but our coordination with Talmadge has been less than desirable despite multiple attempts to improve it. You want to touch that one down?
Is that right?
Or somebody from that,
On the south side of the street, adjacent to the park?
I can call it green for change.
Yeah.
All right, let's do that.
All right.
Okay?
What's that?
Well, I think what we're gonna do, we've got, commercial already at the other three corners. This is the school, it's not going anywhere. This is already the rural section, not a good place to walk across the street. So we'll drop a neighborhood node in either here or here. We can't see what you're doing. You can't see what I'm doing?
Where the W is?
Yes.
I know what he's talking about, but I don't, he's moving his house and I don't see it.
Oh, it's not shown on this TV when you look.
Okay, yeah,
Weird.
it's where the W's at and to the west of it.
Which makes sense, because you have pink there, right?
Yeah, so we're just extending the existing commercial spot that we have.
Stricken there, you call it off for neighborhood node, and there it is in the future. Okay, we'll make those changes. And that is it. We made it.
Thank you, everyone. I thought that was very productive. I think we have good marching orders.
Fun, guys. Sorry if I'm not glad to come.
Steve, I appreciate how much fun, you know, how much effort goes into it.
These are the discussions that, like, that's what gets my brain moving.
Well, me too.